He thought it was just another rainy day in a quiet town, until a little girl ran into the station crying, "They're killing my dog!" What the officer discovered next would uncover a secret buried deep in the heart of Maple Hollow, and a husky named Balto would become the miracle no one saw coming. The storm had begun before dawn, sweeping down from the mountains like a living thing. Sheets of rain beat against the roofs of Silver Pine, a small Montana town that sat nestled between dark pines and winding rivers. By morning, the streets were deserted, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine resin. Inside the modest police station on Cedar Avenue, Officer Michael Hayes sat at his desk, sipping from a chipped mug of cold coffee, his uniform damp from the constant leaks that dripped through the old roof. It was supposed to be another quiet morning. Silver Pine didn't see much more than traffic stops, noise complaints, and the occasional lost hiker. Michael had grown used to the silence. After 10 years in the Marines and 4 more in local law enforcement, silence had become his companion, a language he understood better than words. But that morning the silence shattered. The door burst open, slamming hard against the wall. A little girl stumbled inside, barefoot, drenched, her hair plastered to her cheeks. Her red cotton dress was torn at the shoulder, and her trembling hands clutched something, a strip of blue fabric that looked like it once belonged around a dog's neck. "Please," she cried, her voice breaking between sobs. "Please, they're hurting him. They're killing my dog." Michael was on his feet instantly, his chair rolling back. Hey, slow down." He crouched in front of her, keeping his voice calm, low, steady, the way he used to talk to frightened recruits before combat drills. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl hiccuped through tears. Sophia. Sophia Miller." He nodded gently. "All right, Sophia, tell me what happened." She pointed toward the rain outside, her small chest heaving. "They're beating him. My dog, Balto. He didn't do anything wrong. He was just trying to protect Grandma." Michael felt the cold tighten in his gut. "Who's hurting him?" "There were 3 men," she said between sobs. "They came in a black truck. No plates. They told Grandma to leave our house, but she can't walk fast. Balto barked at them, and they hit him with chains." Behind Michael, an older officer named Frank Dalton looked up from his paperwork. "Did she say Miller?" Frank muttered, pushing himself out of his chair. "You mean Martha Miller's granddaughter?" Michael turned sharply. "You know her?" Frank nodded, his gray mustache twitching grimly. "Yeah. Her parents, Daniel and Claire Miller, they died last week. Car crash on Ridge Road. Sheriff called it an accident, but Martha's been saying it wasn't." Sophia's lips trembled. "They said Grandma has to sell our house. Said it's not ours anymore." Michael's jaw tightened. He stood and grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. "Frank, call dispatch. 3 suspects, black pickup, no plates, possible assault in progress, out by Ridge Road." Frank frowned. "You going alone?" "I don't have time to wait for backup." Frank sighed, his voice low and tired. "You be careful, Hayes. That land's tied up in Richard Vane's development deal. He doesn't play clean." Michael paused for half a heartbeat, then looked down at the little girl. Mud smeared across her knees, bruises blooming faintly on her arm. Yet her eyes, wide and terrified, still held a kind of light of fragile faith that someone would help. He reached for his hat. "Come on, Sophia. Let's go get your dog." The rain hit them like needles the moment they stepped outside. Michael ushered Sophia into the passenger seat of his patrol cruiser and started the engine. The wipers struggled against the downpour, sweeping away streaks of gray water. The siren remained silent. No need to warn the men he was coming. Sophia sat clutching the blue ribbon, whispering under her breath, "He's all I have left. Please let him be okay." Michael kept his eyes on the road, his voice calm. "We'll get there in time. You did the right thing coming here." She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Balto always protects me. Even when the car crashed, he pulled me out. Before the fire." Michael turned to her. "You were in the crash?" She nodded slowly. "He broke the glass and pulled me out. Mama and Daddy didn't wake up, but Balto stayed. He wouldn't leave." Michael didn't speak. The rain blurred the road into silver streaks, his headlights cutting through fog that seemed too heavy for morning. He pressed harder on the accelerator. Whatever was happening out on Ridge Road, it was bigger than a dog. The dirt road that led to the Miller property wound through thick woods. The pines loomed like dark sentinels, their branches heavy with rain. When the cruiser rounded the last bend, Michael saw the old farmhouse, a weathered structure that leaned against time, its porch sagging under the weight of years. And then he saw them. 3 men stood near the barn. One was tall and broad with a shaved head, a jagged scar down his cheek. Another was lean, jittery, eyes darting like a feral animal. The third looked barely out of his 20s. Between them, a husky lay in the mud, his white and gray fur matted with blood and rain. Chains clinked against his sides as one of the men swung again. Sophia screamed, "Balto! Stay in the car!" Michael barked, throwing his door open. His boots splashed into the mud as he advanced, hand hovering near his holster. "Police! Step away from that animal now!" The men froze. For a moment, all Michael heard was the hiss of rain and Balto's weak, broken whine. The bald man turned slowly, his sneer visible even through the downpour. "Ain't your business, officer. We're clearing out property that don't belong to them anymore." Michael stopped 10 feet away. "That land still belongs to the Miller family. Drop the chain." The man laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "You gonna arrest all of us? You're out here alone." Lightning cracked across the sky, lighting their faces for an instant, faces marked by arrogance and impunity. Michael's hand steadied on his gun. "Last warning," he said evenly. "Walk away." They exchanged looks. Then, as if by silent agreement, they bolted. Mud flew as they ran toward the black truck parked by the fence. The engine roared to life, tires spinning as they sped down the road and vanished into the fog. Michael exhaled sharply, then turned back to the husky. The dog tried to lift his head, but collapsed again with a low whine. His fur was soaked, one ear torn, his eyes glassy with pain. But when he saw Sophia running toward him, something flickered there. Recognition. Hope. Michael knelt. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "You're safe now." He pressed his fingers to the dog's neck-weak pulse, but steady. "He's alive," he said quietly. Sophia dropped beside him in the mud, wrapping her arms around Balto's neck. "You're okay, boy. You're okay." Tears mingled with the rain. Balto's tail twitched once, as if answering her. Michael looked toward the porch where an elderly woman in a gray shawl stood watching. Her face was pale but determined, her thin hands gripping a walking stick. "Martha Miller," he called. She nodded faintly. "You must be Officer Hayes." "Yes, ma'am. Let's get you all inside." The house smelled of cedar and wood smoke, a warmth that couldn't hide the fear that lingered in the air. Michael and Sophia carried Balto to the fireplace, laying him on an old quilt. Martha lowered herself into a chair nearby, her eyes shining with both gratitude and grief. "They said we had to leave," she whispered, "that the land wasn't ours anymore. My daughter she refused to sell." Then the car went off the ridge. Michael glanced at the mantel. A single candle burned beside 2 funeral cards. The faces of Daniel and Claire Miller smiled back at him from the photos, young, kind, unaware of what was coming. "I think it wasn't an accident," Martha said quietly. "My Claire told me someone was following them. She said, if anything happens, it won't be by chance." Michael's stomach tightened. Outside, thunder rolled, echoing through the valley. He looked down at Balto, who stirred weakly, his blue eyes meeting his. In them, Michael saw something fierce and intelligence that wasn't just animal instinct, but purpose. The dog had survived for a reason. He pulled a blanket over him. "He'll need a vet. I'll radio for one when I get back to town." Sophia looked up, her small face streaked with tears. "You'll come back, right?" Michael hesitated, then nodded. "I promise." Martha gave a faint, weary smile. "My daughter used to say that good men still exist. I didn't believe her. Maybe I was wrong." Outside, the rain began to fade into mist. The storm had passed, but in Michael's chest, a different kind of storm had just begun. He looked once more at the husky lying by the fire, his chest rising and falling slowly. "You're a fighter, Balto," he murmured. "Let's make sure your fight wasn't for nothing." The old floorboards creaked as he stepped back out into the gray morning. Behind him, the house glowed faintly in the firelight. 3 souls and 1 wounded guardian, bound together by something the storm couldn't wash away. And somewhere deep in the woods, unseen eyes watched from the shadows. The rain had passed, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than thunder. Morning light crept through the fog like a ghost, spilling across the muddy fields of Silver Pine. Officer Michael Hayes stood beside his cruiser on Ridge Road, his boots sinking slightly into the wet ground. The charred smell of gun oil lingered faintly on his hands from the night before. Inside the farmhouse, the quiet breathing of the sleeping girl and her grandmother was the only proof that what happened had ended for now. But it didn't feel over, not even close. Balto lay by the fireplace, bandaged and weak but alive. The vet from town, a kind man named Dr. Harold Gray, had stitched the Husky's torn ear and wrapped his ribs with gauze. "He's tougher than he looks," the vet had said. "But keep him close. Dogs like him, they know when something isn't finished." Michael had barely slept. The storm outside had died, but the one inside him was just beginning. He stepped outside, running a hand over his face as the first hint of sunlight painted the ridges. He could still hear the echo of Sophia's trembling voice. "They killed my parents. They said we had to leave." Something about it gnawed at him. Her parents' car crash, the men with no plates, the black truck, all threads of the same knot. And somewhere at the center of it all was Richard Vane, the man who owned half the valley and wanted the other half. Later that morning, the police station felt colder than usual. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above Michael's head as he typed up his report. Every line he wrote felt like scratching the surface of something much deeper. When he mentioned the men, the truck, and the property threats, he noticed Frank Dalton reading over his shoulder. "You're putting your neck out," Frank muttered. "You go after Vane. You better have proof that doesn't disappear overnight." "I'll find it," Michael said simply. Frank gave a dry chuckle. "That's what your captain said before he got transferred to Butte." Michael turned. "Transferred or silenced?" Frank didn't answer. He just stared at the rain-streaked window, then lowered his voice. "If you want to know what happened to the Millers, talk to Emily Carter. She's been digging into Vane's business deals for months. Works for the Silver Pine Chronicle. She'll talk if she thinks you're not part of the problem." Michael frowned. "Where do I find her?" "Follow the trouble," Frank said. "She's usually there first." By noon, the sun had begun to break through the mist. Michael found Emily Carter sitting at an outdoor cafe on Main Street, tapping on a laptop beneath a green awning. She was in her early 30s, with auburn hair pulled into a loose braid and the kind of alert gaze that made liars nervous. When she saw the police badge clipped to his belt, her expression tightened. Not fear, but calculation. "Officer Hayes," she said, shutting her laptop. "To what do I owe the honor?" "I'm not here to cause you trouble," he said. "I'm here about the Millers." Her eyes narrowed. "You mean the accident that wasn't?" He nodded. "You've got something I need to see." She studied him a long moment before pulling a folder from her bag. "You're lucky I don't delete my leads. I was going to publish this before my editor got a call from Vane's lawyer." Inside were photos, tire tracks near the crash site, brake lines cleanly sliced, and a blurry image from a traffic cam showing a black pickup following the Miller's sedan up the ridge. Michael's pulse quickened. "You get the plates?" "Removed," Emily said. "Vane's people don't make mistakes. But here's the thing. They didn't realize the camera captured part of a decal on the door." She handed him an enlargement. Through the rain-streaked blur, faint white letters spelled out Vane Construction Mining. "Mining?" Michael repeated. Emily nodded grimly. "That's the real prize. The land under the Miller's property is sitting on a vein of lithium. Vane's been buying every plot around it for years. Only the Millers refused." Michael clenched his jaw. "And now they're gone." "Exactly." Emily leaned forward, her voice dropping. "He wants to develop a resort to hide the mining operation underneath. If that land goes public, he loses billions." Michael sat back, his mind racing. "This isn't just about greed." "No," she said softly. "It's about control." That night, Michael drove back to the Miller property. The road was quiet, the moon caught behind thin clouds. As his headlights swept across the field, he saw Balto sitting by the fence, head lifted, eyes glowing silver blue in the dark. The Husky stood when the cruiser stopped, tail low, body tense. Michael stepped out. "Hey, boy," he said gently. "What do you see?" Balto turned toward the tree line, ears pricked. The forest beyond the fence was too still. Michael followed his gaze, his hand drifting toward his sidearm. Then he saw them, two sets of footprints in the mud. Heavy, fresh. He crouched, touching one. Still wet. Someone had been watching the house again. Balto growled low, his fur bristling. Michael whispered, "Easy." But inside he felt the same unease, the instinct of a soldier who knows the fight isn't over. He went inside and found Martha awake in her chair, her wrinkled hands gripping a cross pendant. "They were here, weren't they?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "I'll double patrols tonight." She shook her head. "Locks don't stop men like that, Officer Hayes. Only truth does." Her words settled into him like stone. The next day dawned cold and clear, sunlight cutting across the valley. Michael met Emily at the county records office. Together they combed through decades of property filings and business permits. Most of it was dry legal jargon, but one pattern kept repeating. Small landowners selling under urgent financial distress. Dozens of signatures, all processed by Vane's lawyers. Michael traced one line with his finger. These sales all happened within 2 weeks of accidents, fires, bankruptcies, disappearances. Emily nodded. "He cleans up fast, but not clean enough. Look at this. Miller's deed was renewed 2 months before the crash. They refused again. And 2 weeks later," Michael said, "they were dead." He slammed the file shut. "We need more than paper. We need something that ties him directly." "Then we talked to someone who worked for him," Emily said. "I know a man, Tom Avery, used to run his mining crew before he quit, said Vane was bearing more than rock. I'll reach out tonight." Michael's radio crackled suddenly. "Unit 14, respond. Possible structure fire, Ridge Road vicinity, repeat. Structure fire, Ridge Road." His heart stopped. Ridge Road. He didn't wait. He was already running for the door. By the time he reached the Miller property, the air was alive with smoke and flame. The farmhouse burned like a torch against the gray sky, orange light reflecting off the wet earth. Firefighters hadn't arrived yet. Michael leapt from the cruiser, coughing as he ran through the choking haze. "Sophia!" he shouted. "Martha!" The front porch collapsed as he reached the steps. A shape darted through the smoke Balto, limping, his fur singed, dragging something in his jaws. A child's sleeve. Michael tore through the flames, covering his mouth with his arm. Inside, heat pressed against him like a wall. He found Sophia on the floor near the kitchen, coughing, eyes wide with terror. He grabbed her, pulling her close. "I've got you." "Grandma, I'll get her. Stay with Balto." He pushed through the black smoke toward the back room. Martha was there, collapsed beside her rocking chair, her hand still gripping the pendant. Michael lifted her, coughing violently as he stumbled toward the door. Behind him, a beam cracked and fell, sparks exploding across the room. Outside, the Husky barked wildly, circling near Sophia. Michael staggered through the doorway, carrying the old woman. The fire roared higher behind them, devouring the house that had stood for generations. Sophia screamed, clutching Balto. "Our home!" Michael set Martha down gently on the grass, gasping for air. "You're safe," he said hoarsely. "That's what matters." But even as the words left his lips, he saw headlights at the edge of the woods. A black truck, watching, then it turned and vanished into the mist. When the fire trucks finally arrived, it was too late. The house was gone. Hours later, when the smoke had thinned and only ashes remained, Michael stood beside Frank and Emily at the scene. Frank kicked at a piece of metal half buried in the dirt. "You see this?" he muttered, lifting a charred canister. The label was half burned, but one thing was still visible. Vane Industries, Fuel Division. Michael's hands clenched into fists. "He sent them again." Emily's eyes glistened with anger. "He's not hiding anymore. He's taunting us." Michael turned toward the dark forest where the headlights had disappeared. "Then we stop hiding too." He looked down at Balto, who stood beside Sophia, his fur still smoldered in patches, but his eyes unwavering, bright and alive, like ice over fire. "You saved them again," Michael whispered, his hand resting on the Husky's head. Balto's tail flicked once, slow and solemn, like he understood. The night wind carried the faint smell of smoke through the valley, mingling with pine and earth. Silver pine had just lost another piece of itself, but in the embers, something stronger was being born. Winter crept in early that year, wrapping silver pine in a quiet, relentless chill. The hills turned white, and the once green forest became a world of stillness and frost. The fire that had destroyed the miller's home was weeks behind them now. Yet the scent of smoke still lingered in Michael Hayes's memory, an odor he could neither scrub away nor forget. He stood at the edge of the ranger cabin where Sophia and her grandmother now lived temporarily. Snow drifted in the slow spirals, melting against his jacket. Balto, healed but scarred, padded silently beside him, his thick coat dusted with flakes. The Husky's blue eyes reflected the pale light of dawn, watchful, patient, as if he carried a secret no human could quite understand. Inside the cabin, Sophia hummed softly while feeding the fire. Her grandmother sat in a rocking chair near the window, knitting with trembling hands. The small home smelled of pine and ash. It wasn't the farmhouse, but it was warm, and for now it was safe. But safety in silver pine was temporary. Michael knew that. Vane's reach didn't end with fire. It spread like roots through City Hall, the sheriff's office, even the courts. The man had money, men, and no conscience to hold him back. Michael took a deep breath and turned to Emily Carter, who stood beside his cruiser with a folder tucked under her arm. The air fogged as they spoke. "You said you found him?" he asked. She nodded. "Tom Avery. Used to be Vane's site foreman up near the mining ridge. He left 2 years ago after a collapse killed 3 workers. I finally got him to talk, if we can find him sober enough." Michael raised a brow. "And you trust him?" "I don't trust anyone in this town," Emily said flatly. "But I believe fear when I see it. He's terrified of Vane. That's something we can use." Michael opened the cruiser door. "Then let's go before he changes his mind." The drive north took them along a frozen river that glittered under the gray sky. Pine trees bent under the weight of snow. Every so often, Michael glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the black truck again. When they reached the outskirts of the quarry, the world looked abandoned. Rusted machinery jutted from the snow like the bones of giants. A small shack sat at the edge of the clearing, smoke rising weakly from its chimney. Michael parked and stepped out, his boots crunching against the frost. Balto followed close, ears twitching. Emily knocked on the door. For a moment, nothing. Then came a shuffling sound, and the door creaked open. Tom Avery appeared, a man in his late 40s, his beard unkempt, his eyes red-rimmed and weary. He smelled of stale liquor and cold smoke. "You the reporter?" he rasped. Emily nodded. "And this is Officer Hayes. We just need to talk." Avery's gaze darted to the badge. "You're wasting your time, cop. The sheriff's already in Vane's pocket." Michael didn't flinch. "Maybe, but I'm not." That earned him a hollow laugh. "Then you're already dead." Emily stepped forward. "Tom, you told me you had proof. Something about a list." Avery rubbed his forehead, muttering, "Yeah, the list. I kept copies, stupid of me. Should have burned them. Vane doesn't forgive people who keep receipts." He stumbled toward an old desk, rummaged through papers. Finally, he pulled out a weathered binder wrapped in tape. Inside were purchase orders, property deeds, and typed pages labeled acquisitions, alternate methods. Michael flipped through them. His pulse quickened. These dates, each one lines up with an accident, house fires, collapsed barns, missing persons. Avery slumped into a chair. "He calls it cleaning the slate, says it's cheaper to erase a man than buy his land." Emily's voice was cold. "How did you get these?" "Worked his crews. We moved dynamite for the mines. Same stuff used for the accidents. I started keeping records after the second one. When I tried to talk, one of his men visited my brother. He's been missing ever since." The room fell silent, except for the faint hiss of the stove. Outside, the wind whistled across the quarry, lonely and low. Michael closed the binder. You're doing the right thing now. This can end him. Avery shook his head. No, it won't. You think this paper's enough? He's got half the county under his thumb. You'll need to catch him saying it himself. Emily exchanged a glance with Michael. Then we get him on tape. How? Avery asked bitterly. He doesn't talk to anyone he doesn't own. Michael looked down at Balto, who stood alert near the window, growling faintly. His eyes followed the tree line. Then we make him come to us. That evening, snow began to fall heavier, blanketing the valley in white silence. The cabin glowed faintly in the dark, its windows reflecting firelight. Sophia sat cross-legged on the floor beside Balto, painting with what little she had, old brushes, scraps of paper. What are you drawing? Michael asked, crouching beside her. Us, she said shyly. You, Grandma, and Balto. But I made him bigger, because he's brave. Michael smiled faintly. He'd like that. Sophia looked at the Husky, who was watching the window again. He keeps looking outside, like he's waiting. Michael followed her gaze. Snow swirled against the glass. Beyond it, only darkness. But he trusted the dog's instincts more than his own gut. Balto never stared at nothing. 2 days later, Emily returned with a small black case. Inside was a recording device no bigger than a matchbox. Picked it up from a friend at the Chronicle, she said. It'll transmit within 20 feet. Michael nodded. We'll plant it in Vane's office. That building's guarded day and night, she reminded him. You'll never get in. He smiled slightly. You forget I've done worse with less. Night fell heavy over Silver Pine. The industrial district sat dark except for the faint glow from the windows of Vane Development Group, a converted lumber mill that now served as Vane's private fortress. A black truck idled out front. Michael and Emily parked 2 blocks away, engine off, lights dimmed. The world outside was quiet, snow muffling every sound. Balto sat between them, tail still, eyes locked on the building. Stay here, Michael said softly, though he knew the Husky would never listen if danger came. He slipped from the car, moving through the shadows. Years of military training returned like muscle memory, every step measured, every breath timed with the wind. He reached the back of the mill, crouched beneath the staircase, and listened. Voices, 2 men inside. He peeked through a cracked window. There was Richard Vane, mid-50s, broad-shouldered, his silver hair slicked back, and his tailored suit immaculate despite the hour. Across from him stood a nervous contractor clutching a folder. I told you to scare them, not burn the damn house down, Vane snapped, his voice sharp and venomous. Now the cop's involved, and that mutt's still alive. I thought, the man stammered. Don't think, Vane growled. Just do as you're paid. If the girl and the grandmother don't leave by next week, make sure they do. Permanently. Michael pressed record. Every word etched into the small device taped under the window frame. Then Balto barked. The sound tore through the night like a shot. Michael froze. Inside, Vane's head whipped toward the window. What was that? Michael ducked low and slipped behind the loading crates, heart pounding. A door slammed open. Flashlights cut through the dark. Find him! A guard shouted. Now! Michael sprinted toward the fence, snow crunching beneath his boots. A bullet cracked behind him, missing by inches. He hit the ground, rolling behind a dumpster. Then he saw movement Balto, racing through the snow toward the guards, a blur of white and gray. The Husky leapt, knocking one man to the ground before darting away into the shadows. Go! Emily's voice hissed from the car. Get in! Michael dove inside, slamming the door as the engine roared. Bullets pinged against the bumper as they sped away, tires throwing snow like smoke. Back at the cabin, hours later, the fire burned low. Michael placed the recorder on the table. The playback hissed, then Vane's voice filled the room. If the girl and the grandmother don't leave by next week, make sure they do. Permanently. Silence followed. Sophia looked up from her chair, her eyes wide, understanding more than any child should. Emily leaned forward, whispering, We have him. Michael exhaled, the tension in his shoulders finally breaking. Now we take it higher. But before he could speak again, Balto growled a deep, warning rumble. He rose from his place by the fire, ears pointed at the window. What is it, boy? Sophia whispered. Outside, something moved. The crunch of snow, a flicker of shadow beyond the glass. Michael grabbed his rifle, motioning for Emily to douse the lantern. Darkness swallowed the room. Footsteps circled the cabin. Then silence. Michael stepped quietly to the door, finger against the trigger. Balto stayed by his side, tense, ready. He pushed the door open, revealing nothing but falling snow. Then a single bullet shattered the porch light. Glass sprayed across the steps. "Down!" he shouted, pulling Emily and Sophia behind the wall. Balto barked fiercely, launching out into the storm. The sound of a struggle erupted outside. Snarls, curses, a cry of pain. Michael followed, heart racing. Two men ran for the trees, one clutching his arm. Balto stood in the yard, chest heaving, blood streaking his fur but his stance unbroken. Michael fired a warning shot into the air. "Next one's not a warning." The men vanished into the woods, swallowed by the snow. Minutes later, Emily wrapped a towel around Balto's wound. "It's shallow," she said softly. "He'll be okay." Michael knelt beside the husky, stroking his thick fur. "You saved us again, boy." Sophia hugged Balto tightly, whispering, "He's not just a dog. He's an angel." Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the tracks of men who'd come to silence them. Inside the cabin, the recorder still glowed faintly on the table, a small light in a dark world. Michael looked at it, then at the window where the snow pressed against the glass like a heavy curtain. "This ends soon," he said quietly, "one way or another." Balto lifted his head, ears twitching. His breath rose in clouds against the firelight, like smoke rising toward heaven. And somewhere beyond the mountains, the storm that had haunted Silver Pine began to shift, ready to break, ready to reveal what had been buried beneath the snow all along. Snow blanketed Silver Pine in white silence. The mountains loomed like sleeping giants, their peaks lost in clouds. Days had passed since the attack on the cabin. The firewood stack was nearly gone, and every creak of the walls sounded like a warning. But inside, the air was heavy, not with fear anymore, but with resolve. Balto lay near the fireplace, his blue eyes alert despite the fading wound along his shoulder. Sophia sat beside him, brushing his fur gently, whispering words only he seemed to understand. Across the room, Michael and Emily leaned over the small recorder on the table, the single piece of proof that could bring down Richard Vane once and for all. "If the girl and the grandmother don't leave by next week, make sure they do. Permanently." The words still chilled Michael every time he replayed them. He'd sent the recording to the county prosecutor 2 days ago. No answer. Then to the state investigators. Silence again. Now he understood what Frank had warned him about. Vane's reach didn't stop at Silver Pine. It climbed higher. Judges, officials, men who smiled on television while pocketing blood money behind closed doors. Emily shut off the device. "They're stalling," she said quietly. "Buying time." Michael's voice was low, steady. "Then we'll take it public." They drove into town before sunrise, their headlights cutting through the pale fog. The air smelled of pine and diesel. Main Street was quiet, the storefronts shuttered, the world still asleep. Michael parked outside the Silver Pine Chronicle, and Emily carried the recorder inside. Inside the newsroom, the only light came from a desk lamp. The editor, a weary man named Howard Briggs, looked up from his coffee when he saw them. "You again," he muttered. "Emily, I told you, no more stories about Vane. We can't afford another lawsuit." "It's not a story," she said, placing the recorder on his desk. "It's evidence." Briggs sighed, rubbing his temples. "Evidence gets buried. Lawyers make it disappear. I've been doing this 30 years, and you don't win against men like him." Michael stepped closer, his tone cutting through the gloom. "Maybe not, but if you publish this, if the people hear his voice, they'll do the rest." Briggs looked at him, then at the dog waiting quietly by the door. Balto's eyes caught the light, cold, unyielding, the color of winter steel. The editor exhaled slowly. "You've got guts, Hayes. Fine. But if I go down for this, I'm naming the story after the dog." By noon, the article was live. Land, Lies, and Blood, the Hidden Empire of Richard Vane. Below the headline, a photograph of the Miller's burned farmhouse. Beneath that, a transcript of Vane's voice, word for word. The story spread through Silver Pine like fire through dry grass. Phones rang, crowds gathered, and for the first time in years, people stopped whispering. By afternoon, every station in the region had picked it up. Talk shows called it the corruption scandal of the year. Protesters gathered outside Vane's glass office building, shouting for justice. And for the first time, Richard Vane was silent. But silence didn't mean surrender. That night, a storm moved in again, fast and violent. Snow turned to sleet. Wind howled through the valley. The cabin shook with each gust. Martha sat by the fire, praying softly. Sophia leaned against her, exhausted but calm. Balto rested by the door, ears twitching. Michael loaded his rifle quietly. "He won't run," he said. "Men like Vane don't run. They lash out." Emily looked up from her phone. "You're right. State police issued a warrant 2 hours ago, but he's gone. His truck left town heading east." Michael's jaw clenched. East leads straight past the quarry road. He's not leaving. He's coming. Balto stood suddenly, fur bristling. The window pane rattled. Headlights appeared through the trees. A pair, then another. 3 black trucks. The first bullet shattered the window. Glass sprayed across the floor. Martha screamed, ducking behind the rocking chair. Michael grabbed Sophia, pulling her behind the stove as gunfire tore through the cabin walls. Emily flipped the table for cover, shouting, "They're here!" "Stay down!" Michael yelled. Balto barked, a sound that cut through the chaos like a battle cry, then darted through the open door into the storm. Snow swirled and the world outside erupted in noise. Engines, shouts, and the deep snarl of a dog that refused to back down. Michael returned fire, hitting one of the truck headlights. A man cursed and fell. Another advanced through the snow, firing wildly. The storm turned every shadow into a threat, every flash of light into terror. "Emily, take Sophia and Martha to the back," he shouted. "Get them to the root cellar." "But you, go!" Balto's howl rose through the storm, defiant, furious, alive. Michael burst outside, rifle raised. He saw the Husky locked in a struggle with one of Vane's men, dragging him down into the snow. Another aimed his weapon at the dog. "Balto!" Michael fired. The man fell. The sound echoed across the ridge. Then headlights flared brighter. The third truck approaching. Behind the wheel, through the blinding snow, Michael saw Richard Vane himself, his face twisted with rage. The vehicle roared toward them, engine screaming. Michael fired once, twice, but the bullets only cracked the windshield. The truck kept coming. Balto ran forward, straight into its path. "Balto, no!" The Husky leapt, teeth sinking into the driver's arm through the open window. The truck swerved violently, wheels slipping on the ice. It spun, crashed into a pine, and came to a shuddering stop as steam hissed from the hood. Michael ran to the wreckage, heart pounding. Inside, Vane groaned, blood streaking his temple. Balto limped out of the snow, his fur stained red but his eyes blazing. Michael tore open the door, yanking Vane out. "It's over," he growled. Vane sneered weakly. "You think you've won? I own this town." "Not anymore," Michael said. "You burned it to the ground yourself." He threw Vane face first into the snow and cuffed him as sirens wailed in the distance. State police, closing in. Emily appeared behind him, breathless, holding Sophia close. "It's done," she said. "They're here." Michael looked at Balto, who staggered, then sank slowly into the snow. "No," Michael whispered, kneeling beside him. "Stay with me, boy." Sophia ran forward, tears streaming. "Please don't go, Balto, please." The dog's breathing slowed, his gaze drifting to the sky where the storm was breaking, revealing stars. Then, a soft exhale, warm against the cold. The valley fell silent. The next morning dawned clear. The world gleamed white and still. The smoke of the battle had vanished, leaving only tracks in the snow and the quiet hum of peace returning. Vane was taken away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling behind him. Investigations spread across the state. Arrests followed. His lawyers, his men, his bribed officials, all exposed by the voice he'd once used to command fear. Weeks passed. The town rebuilt. A new home rose where the old Miller farmhouse once stood. The people of Silver Pine gathered for the dedication ceremony. Townsfolk, officers, children, and in the center of it all, a bronze statue stood beneath the fresh snow, a husky with his head lifted proudly toward the mountains. On the base, an engraving read, "Balto, the guardian of Silver Pine." He showed us that courage wears fur and that loyalty can outlast the darkest night. Sophia placed a small wreath of pine cones and red ribbon at the statue's feet. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "Now it's my turn." "Ah, tatunum." She turned to Michael and Emily, who stood hand in hand, watching the sunrise spill gold across the snow. "What did I tell you?" Emily said softly. "He really was an angel." Michael nodded. "Angels don't need wings. Sometimes they just need a heartbeat and a cause." The crowd fell silent as church bells rang through the valley. For the first time in years, Silver Pine felt alive again. Free, whole, unafraid. And in that stillness, as wind swept through the pines, a distant sound echoed faintly, a low, steady howl rolling across the mountains like a prayer. Balto's howl. It carried with it everything the town had forgotten. Faith, love, and the reminder that even in the darkest storms, light will always find its way home. If Balto's story touched your heart, don't leave without subscribing. Every week we share real stories of courage, faith, and second chances. Tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe that loyalty still changes lives, type amen in the comments. Stay kind, stay strong, and remember, miracles still walk among us.